Hello everyone. The next topic for this week is related to innovation and economic development. We will learn first about the technology and economic growth, the relation as it has been explored in economic theory. We will learn the theories from Robert Solow to Paul Romer. After that, we will look at the concerns of the developing economies, particularly in terms of their requirement as to how to catch up with the developed economies. So the theoretical developments, if you look at, are broadly consist of exogenous growth theories and endogenous growth theories. These exogenous growth theories, followed starting from Harrod-Dommer model, and also the major work comes from the Solow model. The Solow model and its further developments are grouped under the rubric of neoclassical growth models. If you look at the common thread among these growth models is that they talk about how technology is something exogenous to the development process. Further, these models also outline a steady economic growth rate results when three economic forces come into play. These forces are of labor, capital and technology. Building on this, the question that has been asked, what if the technology could be determined within the system? And that is where the role of endogenous growth theories become prominent. Building from the work of Romer's theory, and the focus is once again on the economic forces underlying the technological process instead of merely assuming automatic and unmodeled improvements in the technology. So we'll learn more about that. So the Solow model, if you look at it, in 1956, Robert Solow published a seminal paper on economic growth and development entitled A Contribution to the Theory of Economic Growth. He was awarded Nobel Prize in Economics in 1987. This particular model provides insight into the determinants of the long-run economic growth, and it is widely used in economics to analyze a relationship between factors such as capital accumulation, population growth, technological progress, and economic output. So this model starts with the production function, and it describes how an economy then transforms input into output. We had a very long discussion on innovation, what it types, and if you remember, we also had made a distinction between invention, innovation, and technological change. So the way technology is being perceived in these economic models is effectively the way the inputs which are a part of this production process, they are transformed into output. So you have this standard production function which is used in the Solow model in the Cobb-Douglas production function, where you have this K, capital L for labor, and alpha is the share of output attributed to capital. Considering if we have a two-factor model of the economy, that means 1 minus alpha would be the output which is attributed to labor. So if you look at this production function, it exhibits what you call as a constant returns to scale. That means if you double all the inputs, the output also doubles. You will also know that there is something called increasing or a decreasing returns to scale. But in this model, what the assumption is effectively the constant returns to scale. Moreover, as you would know that if we keep one of the factor input and when holding either input fixed, the marginal product of the other input tends to diminish. And this is being talked about as a diminishing marginal product in the economics. Now this happens because in the market equilibrium, each input is also paid according to the marginal product. If that is the case, you will realize that diminishing marginal product ensures that the marginal market equilibrium can exist as such. So you have this model, and again, if there is a lot more mathematical derivation behind it. I will not go into the details of it. However, if required, we can, for the students who are interested, we can share the further details on that. But for the current lecture, we will focus on the key points that come from the model. So here, what is the major innovation coming into the production function? This is a production function that has already been used in the literature. But what was the introduction when from the Solow is basically introduction of this A, which represents the technology. So what do you have? Both labor input L and technology level A. Now they are assumed to grow at a constant rate. So this particular formulation of technology is referred to as a labor augmenting. In theory you also have a capital augmenting, but here the idea is to talk about the labor augmenting. If you suppose now we come up with a better way, a new technique or maybe a new equipment, it is going to enhance the productivity of the labor. The labor itself will become much more effective in terms of its outcome. So that is one interpretation of this particular labor augmenting technology. Apart from that, so what you will have by the end of the, suppose now you multiply both the sides by labor, what you will have is the capital unit per unit of the effective labor, which would be defined as KT. So this would be a small k and as a capital KT divided by 80 into LT. The central equation that we get from this model talks about how the capital accumulate or grow over a period of a time. So in that context, we will see that a certain portion of output, which is now a function of your K, is now being invested through the savings. So certain portion of it is being invested. So that will contribute to your capital accumulation. So that is the main source through which the accumulation happens. However, there are leakages also. So what are those leakages? If you look at it, there are certain proportions that has been identified as the leakage. So this delta is basically the depreciation rate of the capital, because the capital is likely to depreciate over a period of a time. So that has been introduced. Then there is N and G, which are the growth rates of the labor and the technology. So this equation tells us that if saving happens to equal the dilution of the capital per unit of effective labor, then K dot, this one, so capital per unit of effective labor, reaches a steady state value K star, and it will no longer change. The economy in that case would said to be in a balanced growth path. That means capital output and effective labor all will grow at the same constant rate, that is of N plus G. Most importantly, you will find that the output per capital will be growing at a constant rate of G. So there is a sustained growth in the living standards, and it is entirely due to the technological change. Now, if the economy's current capital stock per unit of effective labor, KT, is below the steady state, that is of a K star, then what will happen? Then the economy will save more than what is needed to keep capital stock unchanged. So capital KT will continuously rise until it reaches a steady state of the K star. On the other hand, if the current KT, the stock, is in fact above the steady state, that is the K star, what will happen in that case? Then you will find that the economy will save less, and then what is needed to keep the capital stock unchanged, so that the capital will continuously decrease until it will reach the K star level as such. So then the economy will then come back, it will converge to the once again balanced growth path, independent of its initial condition. But if you put it plainly, no matter what value the initial K dot would be, the initial stock of the capital will be, you will find that in the long run this particular growth rate will get closer and closer to what you will call as the K star, which is your steady state of the growth. So then the economy is said to be in a balanced growth path when your capital output and effective labor all grow at the same constant rate, that is N plus G, and output per capital grows at the constant rate G. So there is a sustained growth in the living standards, and it is entirely due to the technological change. This Solow model in that case predicts that if countries have similar saving rates, population growth, technical progress and depreciation rate, then regardless of their initial output per capita, what you will find that all countries will converge to a similar balanced growth path, and their income levels per capita ultimately will be similar in the long run. So in particular, the Solow model predicts that poorer countries should grow faster and catch up with the richer countries rather quickly. One major concern with respect to this model is that The G which we have been talking about, which is the growth rate of the technology, is rather given as such. So now, building on that, Paul Romer, again he was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2018 for integrating technological innovations into long-run macroeconomic analysis. He not only demonstrates that new technologies are the driving force for the long-run economic growth, but also exemplifies excellent research that helps us to understand the interaction between the human behavior and emerging technologies. Beginning in the mid-1980s, Professor Romer he formalized a relationship between economics of idea and economic growth. Some of the key ideas that has come from his work effectively talk about that when you are looking at this idea, so that A which we had in our model earlier, the technology, that essentially comes from the ideas, the newer ideas to translate your inputs into output. Now these ideas when you look at, they are non-rivalrous in nature and they are only partially excludable. For example, the person can hold a patent over it and they may either charge fee or may not let others to use it. So that kind of a mechanism will ensure a partial excludability of the ideas from the use of the other. But still the ideas are only partially excludable, they are not completely excludable, leaving the scope for the spillovers. These definitions we have already looked at in detail, but the major argument that comes forward is that because of this particular nature, what we realize is the increasing returns and the imperfect competition. So we will talk about these two. First, I will give you a brief idea about the different types of technology goods, which could be either rivalrous in nature or non-rivalrous nature, and whether to what extent they are being excludable. This particular table comes from the work of Professor Romer. So here if you look at, if you want to now, on one side you have the rivalrous good and on the another side you have the non-rivalrous good, and you also put the high or the low level of the excludability. So excludability high, excludability being low. So if it is very easy to exclude others from using your product, and again it is also rivalrous in consumption, in the sense if you consume it, the other person cannot have it. So maybe something like your laptop can come into picture here, or suppose you take the services of somebody, of a doctor or a lawyer. So those could be clearly the case of being rivalrous and being highly excludable. On the other hand, if you look at the non-rivalrous good, but still it is possible to exclude others from using it. Then again, satellite TV transmissions. So it will you will find that it will be easy to exclude other people from using it. Maybe some kind of a computer source code or computer code for a certain software. It will be easy to others to exclude, relatively lower in terms of excludability, but could be higher than some other items. Now if you look at some other situations where the product is rivalrous in nature, but it is not possible to exclude others from using it. For example, fish in sea or in a river and a pond, right? So if you catch it, clearly your competitor will not be able to catch it, but what you will find is that it is rivalrous in consumption and very low in excludability. But if, on the other hand, there will be items like national defense, and most importantly is the basic research and development. It becomes very difficult to exclude others from using it, and the additional cost of using them that is being incurred is rather very low. So you will have a marginal cost falling to zero as such. So these are some of the very important points which comes from Romer's model. Apart from that, also talk about the imperfect competition. Now what happens is, because of this creation of the ideas, the person will be now having a control or ownership of these ideas. They will be able to enjoy a monopoly profit, and what you see that the initial cost of producing them is going to be very high. So the generation of the blueprints etc. will lead to actually very high level of a fixed cost, but a very low constant marginal cost at the later stage. So if you want to simply make it or distribute, then the marginal cost related to that is going to be very low. So then Another point here is that this increasing returns to scale, which are now being enjoyed because the output produced is now no longer going to be the, if suppose now you double both the labor and capital. Earlier we have talked about the constant returns to scale. Here what we talk about is the increasing return to scale by introducing these new ideas in the model. So this concept in that case become incompatible with the assumption of the perfect competition as such. The economics of Romer's model essentially talk about three sectors. One sector is R&D sector, another is an intermediate capital goods sector, and then there is a final goods sector. So this R&D sector, it produces ideas. It also take patents over those ideas and also give a exclusive right to the ideas so that other people can use it or to produce it maybe for the intermediate capital good. And that is where the use of the ideas come into picture in the intermediate goods sector. And though the idea initially are generated in the R&D sector, then again this firm which is in the intermediate goods sector, then they can actually become a monopoly of this particular intermediate good. Final good in this case, producers, they will buy this intermediate good, combine them with the labor to produce the final good for consumption and investment. So using this three sector model, Romer has developed his ideas, which we are not going to discuss here. We are going to talk about the final conclusion or the key takeaway from the model. There you find, and this is how the final model looks like. Here this alpha will be here, not here. And here you see that this particular AT, the change in the technology, is now being determined endogenously. And how it is being determined endogenously? It is determined on the basis of the number of the workers which are now working there, right? That means there is, at some level, there is going to be a distribution between the workers who are employed in the R&D sector vis-a-vis in the final good sector as such. More people are now being engaged in the R&D sector. Clearly more ideas will be generated. So Romer derives a share of labor input devoted to R&D and the rate of technological change G in the market equilibrium. So there is a direct relationship between the input to the R&D sector in the form of the labor which is now devoted there. Now G is the result of the decision once again made by the workers, entrepreneurs, consumer, which is not as it was assumed in the case of a solo model. It is now an outcome of certain actions as such. So as a result, what happened? The solo model, which has treated this G, the growth rate of the technology, which as an exogenous, has now been endogenized. And how it is being endogenized? By in talking about an R&D sector where these new ideas are coming into picture. So in this case, if you look at it, this kind of a model gives you a very interesting policy dimension. Why? Because here you can identify the different ways through which it is possible to generate new ideas. And if economic growth is dependent on these new ideas, clearly the generation of such ideas can then be looked after by the governments as such. So in Romer's model, population growth can be a source of a growth in per capita income. Whereas in Solow model, you've seen that it was like something which was did not contribute to the per capita income growth, and as it was dependent only on exogenous technology. Moreover, as I was saying earlier, Romer model also suggests that the government can now do more. They can use subsidies to correct the market failure in the R&D sector. They can spur economic growth by promoting the development of science and technology. And as a result, there is much more in the hands of the social planner in order to support the economic growth via technological change. We find that in the reality, and many a times you will witness around that very little labor is allocated to the R&D sector. This is the market failure which we have also talked about earlier, where you see that the rewards which come from an invention through a profit stream, again the inventor may not be able to get all the rewards as such, and what you will find is that some of them will spill over, which is a classic case of a positive externality, and as a result you will find that there can be a situation for a market failure, once again bringing in the motivation for the government's intervention in order to support the technology for the economic growth. So then what we see is that the Romer model treats technological progress as the addition of new varieties of the goods available to an economy, while the older products continue in the market. So this is a very important point in this model. Here you find that newer varieties are being introduced, coming through the R&D sector as such, which are now then being absorbed by the intermediate production sector, and then they are being now continued. And as a result, you will find that the older products are also continuing. But if you remember, in Schumpeter's model, we have talked about the creative destruction, where you think about a situation where the product may no longer be available. If you remember, we have done the case of, CDs, first of all, floppy disk was being introduced, and CDs came over, then the video cassettes, over a period of a time were done away with. So there might be a situation where the products are no longer available in the market as they were available earlier. So in that context, Agion and Howitt and Grossman and Helpman, they have presented an alternative specification of technology, and they talk about improving the quality of the existing product. Now these particular models are often referred to as a Schumpeterian growth model because they are anticipated by the work of Joseph Schumpeter, as I said earlier. Now the next recent development in this particular area are also include this model, which identify this general purpose technology and the wave it creates in the enhancement of the productivity in the various sector. So what happens initially, there is a possibility you are going through a low growth phase where the most of the technologies are at a saturated level, and then a new technology is now coming up, but it will take certain time for it to be adopted, to be diffused, to be available to all the sectors. As slowly the absorption and the diffusion happens within an economy across the sectors, particularly of the general purpose technologies, what you will identify is a high growth phase as such. Now this particular model builds on and also essentially resembles the evolutionary Schumpeterian idea of long wave. Now this long waves has been witnessed in the history, and we can look at some of them. This comes from this particular work of Professor Freeman, who talks about at least 5 such waves. So first wave essentially from 1770 and 1780 to 1830, and essentially industrial revolution, very hard time, mechanization is happening, and textile, chemical, iron working, iron casting were the main branches or main sector in which this kind of a wave was being seen. The major features of the NIS at that point of a time, that the science encouraged by national academics, inventor entrepreneurship, learning by doing, and also the reforms in the patent system. The second wave talks about the 19th century, a Victorian prosperity, a time when British economy was really thriving, and the major technologies were, particularly the general purpose, were coming from steam power, railways. So there was a prevalence of steam engines, machine tools, world shipping. And here, in terms of institutions like Institution of Mechanical Engineers, professional education flourished, specializations happened, and we also have already studied that during this particular phase, there was an internationalization of a patent system. So various institutions were also coming together to support the high growth starting from a specific technologies. The third one, again, is in 1800 and 1890s to 1930. It also later led to ended with the Great Depression, sorry. And there you have seen the main technologies being electrical and heavy engineering, and you see the steel shapes, heavy chemicals. These were also the outcome of the in-house research and development which was being done by the chemical and engineering industries. If you remember, we have again and again talked in this particular course of how during the first half of the 20th century, these large R&D labs were rather very prominent. Moreover, they were also recruiting university scientists, and there was also a spread of the elementary education as such. Then in the fourth wave, what you find is 1930s to 1990s. This started with a specific model of the mass production coming from Henry Ford, and here the main branches through which this being carried forward was automobile, armament for motorized warfare, aircraft, consumer durables, highways. And again, you also see the R&D departments to most industries. Technology transfer also began to happen through the licensing agreements, the MNCs, and R&D also started being invested by the state and the military. The fifth one is being in from 1980s onward, which is coming through the information and communication technologies in the sectors of computers, electronics, software, network, satellite. And clearly here we have studied earlier that how the state has supported the initial generic technology, the university collaborations have supported, and also the factory has also been talked about as a laboratory. A WIPO report has talked about two major waves in the last since in the 20th century, coming from the digital age innovation wave, including the deep science innovation wave. This digital age innovation wave is related to supercomputing, AI and automation, makes ample productivity impact across all the sectors and fields of scientific research. When we talk about deep science innovation wave, what we have seen the sectors like biotechnologies, nanotechnologies, new materials being revolutionized, and the changes that is being brought in the health, food, environment and the mobility sectors.